Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Chaf He. We're talking about the law that an Eved Kena'ani goes free if the master knocks out his eye or his tooth or other limbs that are external and don't grow back. And so now we have a story about this very subject. Sabe din Zonya la'atu lipirkei de Rav Chisda amar Rav Hamnuna zil san'inhu. The elders of the city of Nizonya did not come to the pirka of Rav Chisda. The pirka was a public lecture that the main Rosh Yeshiva of a town would give on Shabbatot or holidays. And the expectation was that everybody needs to come to this lecture. The townspeople, the lay people, congregants, and also the students and colleagues of the sage. And it was considered very disrespectful if they did not come. So one time, these elders of Nizonya did not come to the Pirka, that very special public lecture of Rav Chisda. And Rav Chisda was upset about this. And he told Rav Hamnuna, Rav Chisda is a third generation Amora. Rav Hamnuna, also like second generation, both are students of Rav. So it's really not clear, are they colleagues? There may be a second Rav Hamnuna that's a little bit later, because if Rav Chisda is telling Rav Hamnuna, it sounds like he's telling a student to go and do something. Okay, so whatever their exact relationship is, he tells them, Zil, go and ostracize them. Go like sanua, lehatzniya. Go put them away, put them in hiding, meaning put them in cherem, that they should not be able. They didn't come to the pirka, now they have to stay home. No one is allowed to interact with them or invite them or talk to them. And so they are in cherem. Azal amar lehu, ma'ita amar la'atu rabbanan lepirka. Rav Hamnuna goes to these elders and asks them, what happened? Why didn't you come to the lecture? Maybe you had a good reason for it. Maybe you were sick or something. We can try to patch things up here. Amru le amaynete tebainan mine milta vela peshat lan. So the elders said, why should we bother coming? We always ask Rav Chisda about different matters, and he never gives us an answer. So what's the point of coming? He doesn't resolve anything for us. We find it to be a waste of time. Okay, I guess Rav Hamnuna was looking for a good excuse. This is even worse here. Amar lehu mi ba'itu minai midi vela pashitna lechu. Rav Hamnuna answers back, did you ever ask me anything that I did not resolve from you? And after all, I am a colleague or student of Rav Chisda, and I know the answers, right? Ask me anything. And certainly Rav Chisda would know the answer. And so, this is what's an example of a question that I couldn't answer, and that you're upset at Rav Chisda and don't want to come to his pirka because you think he can't answer it. So they give him the following challenge. Ba'omine, ayebed shirso rabo bebesim mahu, kemu shebagaloy dameh ola. Interesting question. If a master owns an Eved Kena'ani and the master castrates his betzim, his testicles, what about that? Do we consider that like an exposed blemish, an external organ, or not? Or not, maybe because it's covered by skin, looks kind of like an internal organ, it's a private area that's covered. Or do we say, since the betzim are protrude, so then it's like an external organ and something that could be seen if someone were to look, so it's like an external organ, and therefore he goes free. Okay, la hava bideh. And Rav Hamnuna did not know the answer to this question. He was like all, confident about himself. Ask me anything. Come on, even I can answer that. Certainly our teacher Rav Chisda can answer it, and they stump him with this question. Amru lo ma shemech. So he had no answer. They told him, what's your name? Amar lehu Hamnuna. That's my name, Hamnuna. Hamnuna may come from a Greek word like hymn, meaning a song, a possible derivation. Anyway, they make a play on words and kind of make fun of him. No, we're not going to call you Hamnuna, but rather Karnuna. This is a play on words. Might come from, nun means a fish, and so Hamnuna could sound like Hamnuna, like a warm fish, a nice warm fish. Karnuna means a cold fish, right? That's all you are. You're a cold fish, like basically you're good for nothing. You're not edible. You're not tasty. You're dead, washed up. So really very, a very strong criticism just because he didn't know his answer. On the other hand, he did boast about himself. They ask me anything and I can tell you what the answer is. So they really shot him down. I think the question may have a literary meaning here. They're basically emasculating him. If an athlete is known for his muscles, but a rabbi is known for his intellect, knowledge, wisdom, ability to answer any question, and here, by stumping him, they basically take away his manhood, and so that's reflected, I think, in the question itself. All right, so he's stumped. He comes back to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda. Amar le matnita ba'u minach. And Rav Chisda said, you didn't have an answer for them. It was a simple Mishnah that they were asking you. There's an obvious answer. Look here in this Mishnah. Ditnan. 24 she'avarim sheba'adam kulam en metamein mishum mihya. There's a Mishnah in Negaim. There's a Braita that is related to it that we'll see. And the Mishnah is talking about these 24 extremities, Rashe Evarim, that on a person, where if there is a nega, there's an afflicted a skin disease on it, they do not cause tum'ah as sara'at. The reason is because they protrude, so it's a pointy thing, therefore the law is that a kohen has to come and see it and examine and determine whether it's sara'at or not. Because it's on a pointy area like a finger, at the end of a finger, the kohen cannot see the whole thing at once. He could look at this side and then turn it over and look at the other side, but because he cannot examine the whole thing at once, he can never determine that it is sara'at. And therefore, any skin disease that is on these 24 protruding extremities will not become tameh. We'll see why this is relevant in a second. So first, what are they? Ve'eluhem rashes be'ot yadayim v'raglayim. So all the ends of fingers and toes. That's 20 already. Rashe oznayim, the edges of an ear, ears. That's 22. Verosh hachotem, the end, the tip of the nose. That's also protruding and sloped. And so that's now 23. Verosh hageviyah, and the head of the male member. That's 24. So that'll be 24 for a male. For a female, you take away that last one. Verashe dadim sheba the end of the nipples for a woman, so she would have 25. Okay, that's the main list. There was a machloket about some other things. Rabbi Yehuda omer av sheba'ish. Rabbi Yehuda says also the nipples of a male, even though they're not protruding as much, still somewhat protruding. So skin disease over there will not be tameh. That's the Mishnah. Vetani Allah, and here's the Braita that you should have known this Braita. Come on, everybody knows this. Bechulam ayved yoseh bahem lechairut. The Braita says all these 24 items that say that if there's a skin disease, the skin disease is not tameh. It are the same evarim, the same limbs that if they are damaged in the Eved Kana'ani, the Eved Kana'ani goes free. It's the same ones. Okay, so this is why it's going to be relevant. Now, although we did not mention Betzim yet, it was coming up soon. Rabbi Omer Afeserus. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says also someone castrated. Well, we already had mentioned the top of the male member, that a skin disease there is tahor, and we said any of these things that are damaged or cut will set the slave free. So what does it mean by adding haseru, someone castrated? Come on, I was going to say in a second, this must mean the betzim, if they are cut off, that is considered grounds for emancipation. So this is going to be the main point here. Now Ben Azai adds in this Braita, Ben Azai Omer af halashon, also the tongue. If a tongue of an Ebed Kena'ani is cut off by his master, that's also grounds for going free. A tongue, even though it's inside the mouth, sometimes it can come out of the mouth, and so it's considered an external organ. It does not grow back. And so Ben Azai adds that to the list of things that Eved Ivri goes out free. Now, Amar Mor, Rabbi Omer, Afaserus, Serus Dema'ilem, Aserus Tigid, Hainu Geviyah. So back to the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who says also someone castrated. In what way castrated? If it's the male member itself, then we already talked about that. We already mentioned that in the Mishnah, because it said any skin disease on the head of the male member is not tameh. And then it said any damage to it will cause the slave to go free. So what does it be adding in that case? Rather, when he says serus, he must mean castrated of his testicles. And this is something that the slave goes free for. And so Rav Hamnuna should have known this. He's boasting. He knows everything. I can answer any question. Meanwhile, it's a baraita that's attached to a well-known Mishnah. And so he should have been able to answer the question. Okay, Rav Hamnuna didn't know the answer, but Rav Chisda turned out did know the answer. So these elders, really, they should have come to the Pirka, and they didn't give Rav Chisda enough of a chance, because obviously Rav Chisda was able to answer at least this question, and so they should have had more respect and gone to his lecture. Now, Rabbi Omer Af Serus. Now that we mentioned this topic, this baraita, let's analyze it further. Rabbi Lashon La, so it says Rabbi added the castrated person, and then Ben Azai after that added also someone who a slave whose tongue is cut out. So it sounds like Rabbi does not agree regarding the tongue. So we ask about that. Rabbi does not think that a slave would go free if the master cut off his tongue. Would mean who haremi shaya mazev nitza hazaa al piv Rabbi Omer hiza hachamim omrim lo hiza. We have a statement that says someone, if you have the kohen doing para aduma, sprinkling to para aduma water on someone tameh, so the water has to land somewhere on his body of the person tameh in order to become tahor. And let's say it lands on his mouth. Rabbi says that's good. That's considered part of his body. Hachamim say no. It has to be part of his exposed limbs and not in his mouth, which is not an exposed limb. Okay, so that's the source. Now, when Rabbi says his mouth, what does it mean? What part of his mouth? My love alishona, does he not mean tongue? And therefore Rabbi considers tongue to be an external organ. That's why the sprinkling of the waters works. But over here Rabbi said if a master cuts off the tongue of his slave, he doesn't go free because it's not an external organ. So Rabbi, which one is it? So we answer lo al sifatav. Now when Rabbi said mouth, in this case we were talking about the lips. Right, it landed on the lips, and Rabbi considers lips to be external, so the haza'ah is good, but tongue is internal, an internal organ, and therefore the slave doesn't go free. So we say on that interpretation, al sifatav pishita, on lips, isn't that obvious? Lips are an external organ. You go look, you can see everybody's lips. It's just part of the face. No, the Chiddush is, I might have thought, sometimes people close their lips very tightly, right? They like turn their lips inside, like this, like when you're making believe you have no teeth. And so the lips go inside. If they're closed very tightly, you can't see them. And so you might have thought that lips are an internal organ, and that's the Rabbi's Chidush, that lips are an external organ, haza'ah works. But in fact, tongue he considers an internal organ. Okay, v'hatanya alishona, hold on. That's so far so good for those sources. But we have a braita that says, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that if it's sprinkled on the tongue, that's good. So we were wondering this whole time, what does piv mean? Maybe it means lips, but here he says explicitly it means a tongue. And furthermore, when they were talking about a blemish of a kohen, various blemishes make a kohen pasul. If someone's has most of his tongue is cut off, and the Rabbi said when he say most of it, it's not by its length or weight, but rather of the part of it that is used for speaking. That part is the tip. That's the tip of the tongue is needed most for speaking. And so you see that this is considered a blemish. And if it would be removed, there would be a serious problem. So these two sources prove that, according to the Yehuda Nasi, a tongue is an external organ. That's why it causes a blemish. That's why if the waters go on the land on the tongue, that's fine, because it's called an external organ. So why doesn't the Yehuda Nasi say that if a slave's tongue is cut off, he goes free? Ela Rabbi Omer serus velama bayalashon. In fact, Rabbi does agree. When he said castrated, he's saying yes, a castrated person, slave, goes free, and of course someone whose tongue is cut off by his master also goes free. And then Ben Azai Omer lashon aval serus la. Ben Azai comes and argues and says only for tongue, but not for castrated. Okay, umay af. akamaita. How come Ben Azai says also? Right? If you look back here, first you have Rabbi says also castrated. We're interpreting that to mean also castrated and of course tongue. And Ben Azai says also lashon. Also sounds like it's adding to what came before, not saying only lashon. So it doesn't work. We explain that Tana Shema. We answer akamaita that this af of Ben Azai is going on what came before. So we hachinaktima Ben Azai beresha. So really, the Ben Azai should be mentioned first. Ben Azai will add and say, I think also tongue, and then the B should say not only other organs and the tongue, but also castrated. That would be the logical order. So we say, you're right, that would be the logical order, but we don't always go in logical order. Tana shema'ah l'debi ukba'ah, ushma'ah l'deben azai v'taneh, u'mishnah lo zaza mimekoma. The transmitter, the memorizer, he heard the statement of Rabbi, and he put it in place. Later on, he heard the tradition of Ben Azai, and he added it after. Well, the way memory works is that you memorize a certain thing, you can add to the list, but you can't change the list beforehand, because your memory is by association, so you can add another thing to the end, but you can't move something from beforehand. And therefore, it's as follows. The Braita read, Bekulam Eved Yoseh Behem Lecherut, as the Braita, as a commentary on this Mishnah. And then the memorizer heard Rabbi's tradition that says also Serus. When Rabbi said that, he meant Serus and of course tongue, because the tongue would be even more considered external than the Betzim, and so he added that. But then later on, the memorizer heard Ben Azai's statement. Now, Ben Azai's statement really was a comment directly on the Braita, B'chulam Ebed Yoseh Behem Lecherut, and he said Af HaLashon. He meant to add only the Lashon. It just turns out it ends up being after the B, and then that makes us think that Ben Azai is arguing and saying not Serus, and the B, Ben Azai is agreeing and saying also Serus, but the B is saying Serus, but not Lashon. But in fact, that's not the case. Ben Azai added Lashon only and not Serus, and the B said Serus and even Lashon, and that's how we resolve all of the contradictions. Amar Ula, Hakol modim b'lashon l'inyan tum'ah, degaluhu etzel sheretz. Mai ta'ama, asher yiga bo amar Rachamana v'hai nameh bar negi'ahu. So even though we just saw regarding the tongue that there was a machloket, and according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that's considered something external, such that if it gets cut off in a slave, then it would be the slave would go free, and Chachamim did not include the tongue. Now Ula is going to clarify the status of a tongue for two other related halachot. So everyone agrees, in fact, that regarding tum'ah, to receive tum'ah, that a tongue is considered an external organ. How do you know? Because regarding sheretz, this is the 8 creepy crawlies, like a lizard. If anyone touches a dead lizard or rat or so on, they become that high level of tum'ah. What if you don't touch it with your finger? What if someone sticks out their tongue and touches the dead lizard with their tongue? Why would you do that? I don't know. But what if you did? Well, it says asheri gabo, and this is called negi'ah, and therefore it is considered an external organ. It's only if you touch it with an external organ. So there you go. A tongue is an external organ regarding tum'ah, becoming tameh. Linan tevila ketamun dameh mai tamar chas besro b'mayim amar Rachamana ma besro me'abrai afkol me'abrai. Regarding tevila, going into mikveh to become tahor, however, a tongue is considered an inside organ, concealed organ, because the pasuk says that you have to wash your whole body with water. Wash your whole body, all of your flesh, means the flesh that's outside. If someone goes to the mikveh, you don't have to open your mouth and stick your tongue out for the mikveh water to be inside one's mouth and touch one's tongue. That's not necessary. So only external. So you see, the tongue is considered an internal organ when it comes to tevila. Lo nechluku ela l'inyan haza'ah, Rabbi medameh la latum'ah, v'Rabbanan medamu la l'tevila. However, their argument is regarding sprinkling. It's also regarding a slave going free, but that's related to sprinkling. If the Kohen, who's sprinkling the paraduma water, sprinkles it on someone's tongue, Rabbi says that's valid. Why? Because he says that sprinkling is like tum'ah, just like becoming tameh by touching a lizard with your tongue is considered external organ. So too, to be sprinkled, if it touches your tongue, it's considered an external organ, and the person is tahor, and the slave also goes free. If his tongue gets cut off, it's an external organ for those laws. Rabbanan, however, compare the sprinkling to a case of immersion in a mikveh. In a mikveh, you don't stick out your tongue because it's an internal organ for that law. So too for sprinkling, it's like an internal organ, and therefore the sprinkling on the tongue does not take effect. Both of their opinions are based on the same pasuk. This is a pasuk here in 19. The pure person will sprinkle this paraduma water on the impure person on the third and seventh day, and that will purify the person on the seventh day. He will wash his clothes, and he will immerse in water, and then become tahor in the evening. So the B says, look how it talks about hatahor ala tameh. So you see that becoming tahor through sprinkling is compared to becoming tameh. Just like you become tameh by touching a lizard with your tongue, so too you become tahor by touching the sprinkling, the waters with your tongue. Rabbanan, however, focus on the end of the pasuk that says he'll become purified on the seventh day, and they'll wash his clothes and immerse in water. So you see that the sprinkling is being compared to immersion in water. Just like immersion in water, the tongue is an internal organ, so for sprinkling it's an internal organ, and the water being sprinkled on the tongue is not effective. Rabbanan, how come you don't compare it to tumah? Doesn't it say so in the first half of the pasuk? And he says, no, no, it makes more sense to compare two ways of purification through mikveh or purification through the sprinkling of the waters. In both of them, the tongue is an internal organ. Rabbi, why don't you say that, what about that logic and compare the sprinkling to tevilah in the mikveh? He says, no, here in the pasuk, that separates, okay? It's separate, new matter. Listen, you're going to have to wash your clothes and you have to go to the mikveh, but that's a separate issue. It makes more sense with the that stops the sprinkling, right? Sprinkling was the first half of the pasuk, and this other washing is the second half of the pasuk. So in the context of the first half regarding sprinkling, that's when it says tahor al tameh, comparing the way you become tahor to the way you become tameh, and both of those do involve a tongue as an external organ. Wait a second. For tevilah, are you sure that Rabbi considers the tongue to be an internal organ and it doesn't have to touch the water? But look at this case of a rabbin who said in the name of Rabbadah, in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, that there was a maidservant in the house of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. She went to the mikveh and she came back up. And then after she went to the mikveh, they found that there was a little bone stuck between her teeth when she went to the mikveh. And Rabbi said she has to go to the mikveh again. What you see from here is that the inside of one's mouth is considered like external, and therefore the waters have to touch the inside of one's mouth, and this would be a chatzitza, a separation inside one's mouth also. So it sounds like according to that, anything inside one's mouth has to touch the mikveh waters, including your tongue. So how come you said before that everyone agrees, even the Rabbi, that regarding tevilah, the tongue is an internal organ? Over here, the Rabbi was concerned that water should reach every part of even inside her mouth. And the answer is, even though we don't require water to go into one's mouth and touch everything in one's mouth in the mikveh, but it has to be potentially able to go and reach everywhere if you would open your mouth. That is in fact the halacha today. You can't have things in your mouth. When you go to the mikveh, you can't have things in your mouth. That would be a chatzitza. You have to floss and brush your teeth and make sure there's nothing, no food stuck there or anything, which would be a chatzitza. Even though you don't have to open your mouth when you go to the mikveh, the water doesn't have to go inside, but it has to be potentially able to touch everywhere if you would open your mouth. That's the point, and that's the halacha. That's the problem with the bone. The bone is an external thing that is a chatzitza, so that's no good. A tongue is a part of your body, so that is totally fine. This is similar to a law of regarding actual and potential to the law of Rabbi Zera regarding mixing or flour and oil for korban mincha, that you have to use a vessel that's big enough that you can mix it well. Even though you don't actually have to, in reality, mix the oil and flour, but you can't put so much flour and oil in a vessel that if you would try to mix it, it would overflow and you wouldn't be able to mix it well. You have to, so therefore there's a maximum of how much you can put into a vessel. So here also, even though you don't actually have to mix it, you have to have the potential to be able to mix it. And that's the same thing with one's tongue in the mikveh. Even though it doesn't have to touch the water, has to be that potential that if you would open your mouth, it would touch everything, all the parts of the inside of one's mouth. And now back to the original question that we started with regarding the castration. Would a person go of betzim? That was a question asked Rav Hamnuna. Would an eved go free or not? So we saw that the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in that Braita on the Mishnah was that yes, in fact, you would go free because he said castrated, and we said that must refer to betzim, and that is one of the things that one goes free for. So therefore the answer was yes. Now we add, actually it's a machloket among Tanaim, because in the following Baraita, on the Pasuk that says, this is for an animal sacrifice, I cannot have a blemish. A blemish is something external. Only external things are considered blemish for animal sacrifices, not internal, whatever, injuries or deformities. So regarding animal privates, I don't know if they are called privates because they don't really cover them up, but we'll call them that. It says umauch v'chatut v'natuk v'charut. An animal has any of these problems that it is bruised, crushed, torn, cut. You cannot bring them as a sacrifice. What is that referring to? Kulan ba besim diber b'Yehuda. This is referring to if the animal's besim have any of these types of injuries, that is considered a blemish. Therefore, you see, according to Rabbi Yehuda, this is the Rabbi Yehuda generation earlier than the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and he is in agreement that betzim are considered external organs. Therefore, he would agree that if they were cut off in an Eved Kena'ani by the master would go free. Now we ask about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Does he mean all this crushed and cut only for the betzim and not for the member itself? Ela kulan af betzim de Rabbi Yehuda. No, it means also, right? Either the reproductive member or the betzim, the animal would be a blemish, and if it was a slave, the slave would go free. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omed kulam bagid. Rabbi Eliezer says no, only the member itself, not the betzim. You see, according to him, while the gid is an external organ, the betzim are considered internal organs, and therefore not considered a blemish. So therefore, he would say if Eved Kanani got his betzim chopped off or crushed or anything by the master, he would not go free. They are not considered external organs. Rabbi Yosef Omer ma'uch v'chatut af bebetzim natuk v'charut begidin v'besim la. Rabbi Yosef splits the difference, and he says the first two types of injuries of bruised or crushed, that applies both to the gid and to the betzim. However, broken or cut, that applies to the gid only, but not to the betzim. Okay, and now we come to the next Mishnah, which talks about the acquiring of animals and different types of animals. Behema gasa niknet bimsira v'adaka b'hagbaha divrei Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Eliezer. Hachamim omerim behema daka niknet bimshicha. If you have a large animal, that would be like a cow or an ox or a horse, large animals, if you want to effectuate a transaction, a transfer of ownership, these would be hard to pick up or anything. So you have to do misira. Misira means giving the reins over, the control over it, the reins or the bit by which you would control a large animal. You give them, one person gives it over to the other, and thereby it's acquired. But if it's a small animal like sheep and goats, there you have to actually lift it up. Not so hard to lift up a little sheep. They're not so heavy. So like other movable objects, you'd have to lift it up to acquire it, according to the Bima'id and the Eliezer. Hachamim, however, say for a small animal, you don't have to lift it up. You can just pull it. They're easy to pull. They listen. Big animals, you go try to push a camel, right? It's not going to go very far. And so for the camel, also that'll be a big animal. You have to do misira, transfer the reins. For a small animal, either hagbaha, according to the first two rabbis, or chamim say mishicha. You don't have to lift it. You can pull it. Tarash Rav Bekimhonya. The Amora Rav, when he was in the town of Kimhonya, he gave a derasha, a public lecture, and he announced that a large animal can be acquired by pulling. It doesn't say mesira, he said meshicha. That's where we're going to ask about that. So Shmuel found the students of Rav, and he says, I heard a rumor that Rav gave a derasha, and he said that a big animal, you can acquire it by pulling it. Is that true? We said it has to be by passing in our Mishnah. Is he going against the Mishnah? And furthermore, we heard Rav say that a big animal has to be acquired by passing over the reins. So he even said that. Hadar be'mahi, has Rav changed his mind? And the answer is yes, he did. Indeed, he changed his mind. Hu de'amar ki haytana detanya. Hachamim omrim zo vezo niknet b'mshicha. A different version of here says Chachamim say only a small animal is b'mshicha, but there's a braita according to which Chachamim say both big and small animals you have to do are acquired by pulling, and Rav changed his mind to follow this baraita, so that is his source. Rabbi Shimon omer zo v'zo b'hagbaha. The baraita also quotes the opinion of Rabbi Shimon says both small and big animals you acquire by lifting. Now, how are you going to lift a camel or an elephant? Good question. Matkif Rav Yosef Rabbi Shimon b'mei. Okay, according maybe a cow, maybe you can lift it. Even a cow you really can't lift. But he brings the most exaggerated example. Okay, according to this, you want to acquire an elephant. According to Rabbi Shimon, how could you ever acquire an elephant? You can't lift it. So a few answers. Okay, you can't. You're right. You can't do it bahagbaha, but there are other ways to acquire things. So chalipin is a good way. I'll give you a handkerchief, and by accepting the handkerchief, you transfer ownership of the elephant. Or let's say the elephant is in your courtyard, and so I can rent out your courtyard just for a few minutes, and then the elephant is now in my courtyard because I rented it out, and now it's mine, and then I could give you back your courtyard, and then I could take my elephant. Rabbi Zera says, I can actually do it with hagbaha. Not exactly hagbaha. Rather, I can do it in a different way by bringing 4 vessels and put them under each of the elephant's feet. Right, have the elephant move and go into these 4 vessels. I'll put like a basket or a pot and have the 4 legs of the elephant in my vessels, and therefore I acquire it because it's in my vessel. Right, if I take something and I put it in my shopping bag, now it's mine, right? It's in my personal domain. So that's that's another way that one can acquire it. Now, now we have a question about this. In general, there's a big discussion about whether the vessels of a buyer, when he is in the store or house of the seller, whether his vessels can acquire something. For example, if I come to your home or your store, and I have my shopping bag. I put some things into my shopping bag on the counter in your store or your home. That's a big discussion whether I acquire them because they're in my basket, or since I'm in your store, I do not acquire them. So now, since this is a big discussion that we've never resolved, but now it seems like you've so easily resolved it, because here you think that if I go to your field, we're assuming I'm going to your field where your elephant is. Makes sense, that's where he would be. And I go and I just bring 4 baskets and I put them under its feet. Now I acquire it even though I'm in your domain. So have you resolved this issue? You haven't resolved it. So how can you assume that this would be good? And the answer is, no, we're not talking about that it's in the seller's field, but we're in an alleyway, no man's land, and in that it's an alleyway. Then you have your stuff there. I have my basket there. If I put your stuff in my basket in an alleyway, then it is mine. So we brought the elephant to the alleyway, and you do this over there, and that's the way. Another way that you can acquire the elephant by putting it in my vessels. Okay, we really still don't have a situation of Hagbaha, but now we're going to end off with one. Or you could get bundles of vines. 2 interpretations. Either you take some bundles of vines and have the elephant step on them and elevate it. So see, I'm elevating the elephant, or by dangling them in front of it high up, such that the elephant will have to jump up on its hind legs and lift itself up, but I'm causing it to be lifted up. So that's also Hagbaha. So in fact, even though an elephant, I can't physically go under it and pick it up, but I can cause it to go up on its own, and therefore that would be a way to acquire an elephant according to the Bishimon. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.